A judge humiliated Jasmine Crockett right there in open court, but just minutes later, guess what? He was the one in handcuffs. And you won't believe how the whole thing unfolded. Now, Jasmine Crockett was no rookie when it came to intense, high-pressure situations. This woman had spent years in the trenches, first as a criminal defense attorney, fighting tooth and nail for folks who couldn't even afford proper representation. And later, she became a congresswoman, turning her voice into a weapon against injustice, cutting through lies like a blade. But let me tell you, on this particular day, things felt different. The air felt heavier as she stepped into Judge Howard Gates' courtroom, a man infamous, almost legendary, for his razor-sharp tongue and wild, unpredictable rulings. And this wasn't just any hearing. No. At stake here was a high-profile, deeply tangled local government corruption case. The kind of case that could blow up careers and shake people's faith in the entire system. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about power, about truth. The man on trial? A big-shot real estate developer with deep, very cozy ties to Republican power circles. He was accused of siphoning taxpayer dollars, money meant for public projects, and secretly funneling it into his own personal playground. The evidence stacked against him? Substantial, serious, damning. And Jasmine? She'd been specially appointed as prosecutor on this case because of her fierce background and unshakable reputation for fighting on the side of justice. She was ready. Oh, she was prepared. What she wasn't ready for was the sheer hostility radiating from the bench the moment she walked in. Before she even opened her mouth, Judge Gates didn't even bother to look at her properly. Instead, he sat there, slowly flipping through a file, dragging it out, letting the courtroom drown in silence. But not just any silence. No, this was the heavy kind, the kind that presses down on your chest, that carries weight. And then, without lifting his eyes, he finally spoke, voice dripping with condescension. "Miss Crockett, I trust you've got something useful today, or should we skip ahead to the part where you waste everyone's time with your dramatics?" A few chuckles, low, smug, came from the back, mostly from the developer's legal team. Jasmine ignored them. She'd been through worse. "Your Honor," she replied coolly, "the evidence will do the talking. This case is about taxpayer money being misused. My job is to lay out the facts, plainly and honestly." Judge Gates leaned back like he couldn't be more bored. Taxpayer money, huh? Isn't that the excuse for every baseless accusation these days? His tone could have sliced glass. Jasmine's jaw tensed. But her voice stayed steady, calm, professional. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I wouldn't call allegations of fraud and corruption baseless." Their eyes locked, his cold, smug, calculating, her sharp, determined, unflinching. But before she could continue, he cut her off again. "Miss Crockett, do us all a favor. Spare me the lectures and get to the point. I don't have the patience for your progressive fantasies." A murmur ran through the courtroom like static. People shifted in their seats. Even the reporters glanced up from their notebooks. Judges could be tough, sure. But this felt personal. Jasmine inhaled deeply. She recognized exactly what was happening here. Judge Gates wasn't just testing her. He wanted to throw her off, keep her scrambling, make her doubt herself. But she wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. She calmly reached for a folder, opened it, and said, "Your Honor, if I may, I'd like the court to review Exhibit A. These financial documents clearly demonstrate." But before she could even finish, Gates jumped in again, cutting like a knife. "Do you always bury people in paperwork, Miss Crockett? Or is this just your way of covering up a lack of real evidence?" That one stung, not because it was clever but because it was cheap. The defense attorney smirked like the judge was his personal attack dog. A few reporters exchanged glances, pens scribbling faster. But Jasmine? She didn't even flinch. Back when she'd been a defense attorney in rough Texas courtrooms, she'd learned how men like this operated. They thrived on intimidation, on throwing their weight around. The only way to win? Never let them see you shaken. She paused deliberately, just long enough to make her point, then placed the folder back down and folded her hands. "Your Honor," she said quietly but firmly, "if this is personal, I'd be happy to request a recess and clear up whatever professional concerns you may have. It wasn't disrespectful, but it wasn't subtle either. It was a warning. And something in Judge Gates' smile twitched. Annoyance? Amusement? Hard to tell. But he wasn't done. "Oh, I have no concerns, Miss Crockett," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I just recognize a weak case when I see one." This time, the reaction wasn't just murmurs. It was gasps. Heads turned. People shifted in their seats. This wasn't how a judge was supposed to behave. But Jasmine? She kept her cool, adjusted her blazer, smoothed her papers, looked him square in the eye. "Well then, Your Honor, let's allow the evidence to speak for itself." But in that moment, she noticed something shift in his face. Not just arrogance, not just disdain, something more. A flicker of fear? Like a man with something to lose. And that's when it hit her. This wasn't just a hostile judge. This was a man hiding something. As Jasmine laid out her case, she could feel it. His stare, heavy, unrelenting, trying to knock her off course. Every word she spoke, she could almost hear him waiting, ready to pounce. But she wasn't stopping. "Your Honor," she continued, her voice sharp but calm, "these documents reveal serious discrepancies in funding. The defendant's company received triple the approved budget, and none of it is accounted for in state records." She turned, gesturing toward the projection screen displaying the financial data. But right then, Gates cut in again, smug as ever. "Miss Crockett, I hate to interrupt your math lesson, but I think we've all seen enough numbers today." She glanced at him, then back at the screen. He wasn't even pretending anymore. "Your Honor," she replied, "those numbers are the foundation of this case." He scoffed. Loudly. "Sure. And yet, I see nothing here that's worth this court's time." There it was again. Wasting time. That was his game, trying to bury the case before it even started. Behind her, she could hear her team shifting uneasily. They felt it too. Something wasn't right. Jasmine tightened her grip on her pen, flipped to the next page. "Your Honor, I would like to submit a motion." "Denied," Gates snapped. She glanced up, eyebrows raised. "I haven't even stated the motion yet. And I can already tell," he sneered. "It's going nowhere." Gates leaned forward, elbows on the bench like he was about to deliver a punchline. "Let's be honest, Miss Crockett. Your entire case is built on wild theories, fuzzy math, and a lot of screaming about corruption." The defense attorney grinned. He hadn't said a word, but he didn't need to. Gates was fighting the case for him. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "Your Honor, are you refusing to hear my motion before I even present it?" A long, uncomfortable pause. "I'm refusing to entertain this circus any longer." Gates shot back. The courtroom crackled with tension. Eyes darted. Heads turned. Even the court reporters in the back scribbled faster. Jasmine glanced at the jury, one woman in particular, mid-50s, dark blazer, brows furrowed tight. She wasn't the only one who noticed. The room felt alive now, electric. And arrogance? It draws attention. Jasmine straightened her shoulders. "Very well, Your Honor. Then let's move on." She clicked to the next slide. "This document," she began, "obtained via subpoena, shows." "Miss Crockett," Gates interrupted again, but his tone had changed. Jasmine stopped. The judge's posture was different now. No more smirking, no more snark. His hands were clasped, mouth tight. "Approach the bench." It wasn't a request. It was an order. The courtroom hushed as Jasmine stepped forward. When she reached him, his voice dropped so low, no one else could hear. "I'd strongly suggest you reconsider the path you're on, Miss Crockett." She tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me?" He leaned in. "Some fights," he murmured, "aren't worth fighting." The warning was clear. A threat, disguised as advice. Jasmine didn't blink. "I don't scare easily, Judge Gates." A muscle in his jaw twitched. She turned, walked back to her table, her mind racing. That wasn't about courtroom procedure. That was personal. That was a warning. She sat down, keeping her face neutral, her team watching her closely. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to continue." A pause. He let the silence stretch, testing her. Proceed. But make it brief. She ignored the jab, flipped to the next document. This contract, she began, details project expenses. Costs listed? $2 million. But, she added, clicking to the next slide, this internal ledger shows nearly double that amount transferred. And this, she said, holding up another sheet, is the approval signature. She let the moment breathe. Signed by Judge Howard Gates. The courtroom didn't just tense, it cracked. Movement rippled across the room. The defense attorney stiffened, smirk gone. Gates froze. Your Honor, Jasmine said quietly, would you care to explain why your signature is on an unauthorized financial document? The silence was deafening. That document, Gates finally said, is inadmissible. Jasmine tilted her head. On what grounds? It was obtained improperly. With respect, Your Honor, she said, voice sharp. It was subpoenaed. Then it was mishandled. I'm ruling it inadmissible. The shift in the room was palpable now. Everyone was watching. The jury, the press, even the bailiff. Jasmine crossed her arms. You do realize this is a public hearing, correct? That everyone just witnessed you suppress key evidence without a valid reason. Gates' jaw clenched. That's enough, Miss Crockett. She didn't move. Then slowly, deliberately, she sat down, reached into her briefcase, and pulled out a small recorder. She pressed play. A voice filled the courtroom. Unmistakable, low, gruff. Take care of it. I don't care how. Make sure she never gets her hands on those ledgers. Silence. Thick. Suffocating. Judge Gates didn't move. He couldn't. The entire room had just heard him. And the real game had just begun.